In less than 3 years, over 1,200 tanks have been destroyed, abandoned, or captured in Ukraine, marking a profound and unprecedented shift away from traditional armored warfare concepts that have dominated military thinking for much of the 20th and early 21st centuries. Tanks such as the Leopard 2, One Abrams, and Challenger 2, once heralded as the pinnacle of NATO's armored might and technological sophistication, are now routinely subjected to combat conditions that their designers and strategists never envisioned nor prepared for. On today's battlefield, dominated by relentless and pervasive drone surveillance, every movement by armored units is detected and tracked within seconds, often before tank crews can even react or take evasive action. These heavily armored vehicles, which traditionally symbolized rapid breakthroughs, overwhelming firepower, and an almost invincible battlefield presence, have been rendered vulnerable targets from above, forced into more defensive roles where the primary emphasis has shifted from aggressive maneuvers aimed at territorial gains to mere survival and evasion. This profound change extends far beyond the confines of Ukraine's borders, challenging and upending decades of Western military doctrine that emphasized the combined virtues of armor, firepower, and mobility as the keys to battlefield supremacy. Today, relatively inexpensive, commercially available drones equipped with cameras and sensors are able to hunt down and expose the positions of these multi-million-dollar machines with alarming efficiency. In some cases, tanks are deployed as decoys, intentionally drawing enemy fire to reveal attacking positions, while others execute brief, lightning-fast strikes before vanishing under cover, attempting to avoid the inevitable counterattacks guided by aerial reconnaissance. At the onset of the conflict, Ukraine's strategy involved deploying tanks en masse to overwhelm Russian defenses with speed and devastating firepower, but unmanned aerial vehicles, WAVs, continuously exposed the exact locations of these vehicles, neutralizing much of their advantage. Additionally, Russian forces employed mines and improvised explosive devices, IEDs, to slow down tank columns, forcing them into prolonged pauses that made them easy targets for precise artillery strikes, thereby disrupting the momentum and severely degrading command and control capabilities. Immobilized tanks often blocked key routes, funneling movement into predictable, narrow corridors easily observed by drone operators, who then relayed precise targeting coordinates for swift, lethal strikes. In this new reality, tanks no longer dictate the terms of battle, but instead are controlled and constrained by forces operating from above, reshaping the fundamental nature of armored warfare. Infantry units have faced similar challenges, with rear elements unable to maneuver without immediately drawing lethal fire, resulting in the fragmentation of combined arms operations into a series of disjointed, reactive skirmishes rather than coordinated offensives. Tank crews rapidly learned that survival now hinged less on the thickness of their armor or the power of their weapons, and far more on their ability to avoid detection entirely, a harsh and costly lesson learned in a matter of weeks. This transformation underscores the urgent need for military forces to integrate electronic warfare capabilities, develop effective counter-drone tactics, and enhance rapid intelligence sharing within mechanized units, compelling armed forces worldwide to adapt their strategies to a new battlefield paradigm defined by information dominance, technological asymmetries, and the increasing role of unmanned systems in shaping combat outcomes. Within days, it became starkly evident that the environment fundamentally undermined the long-standing concept of an armored breakthrough, a strategy once considered nearly invincible on open battlefields, where mass tanks could exploit speed and firepower to overwhelm defenders. Russian forces rapidly processed intelligence gathered from every armored advance, employing a sophisticated network of advanced surveillance technologies and real-time data analytics to anticipate and counter enemy maneuvers with remarkable speed and precision. The traditional notion that tanks could absorb significant damage and relentlessly push forward collapsed under the weight of coordinated multi-directional attacks launched by attack helicopters, artillery batteries, unmanned aerial vehicles, WAVs, and highly accurate missile systems. This multifaceted threat environment rendered even brief exposure on open ground too perilous, effectively neutralizing the tank's once reliable advantages in mobility and armored protection. Commanders were thrust into a critical dilemma. Pressing the offensive in these conditions meant incurring unsustainable losses, yet halting the advance risked ceding the initiative and abandoning the tank's historical role as the spearhead of ground assaults. This operational stalemate halted forward momentum and forced a comprehensive reevaluation of armored tactics, revealing a widening and dangerous gap between entrenched military doctrine and the evolving realities of modern combat, which is increasingly dominated by persistent surveillance and precision-guided strikes. At Rabatino, Ukrainian tank units trained rigorously to follow NATO manuals that emphasized protection, combined arms integration, and coordinated maneuvers, found their progress severely hindered by the narrow, constricted terrain that slowed movement and funneled vehicles into predictable, vulnerable formations. UAVs continuously tracked every movement, while attack helicopters and anti-tanks exploited these intelligence advantages to strike with devastating and lethal precision. Initial missile and drone hits disrupted the offensive's momentum, forcing frequent halts and tactical withdrawals under intense and unrelenting fire, while recovery and infantry support units were constrained and exposed, unable to maneuver effectively without incurring heavy casualties. Losses mounted relentlessly as the persistent threat from missiles and drones created a constant state of vulnerability, steadily draining offensive initiative and eroding morale among tank crews and supporting infantry alike. Commanders found their tactical options shrinking rapidly. They could either advance despite being under constant targeting or retreat, often abandoning valuable vehicles to save personnel lives. Communication systems suffered breakdowns as units prioritized immediate survival against incoming threats over maintaining coordinated battle plans, thereby undermining the essential cooperation between armor and infantry that is critical to effective combined arms operations. The problem had shifted from tank durability and firepower to the outdated and untenable role of armored spearheads on a battlefield now dominated by omnipresent observation and precision strikes. The fighting at Rabatino demonstrated that defenders, leveraging superior surveillance and fire control, controlled the tempo of battle, making repeated armored offensives both costly and predictable. The hard and sobering lesson was unmistakable. Tanks would no longer lead assaults through sheer brute force alone. Instead, the future of armored warfare in this technology-driven era would hinge upon enhanced survival tactics, stealthy movement, and patient, adaptive tactics that prioritize tactical discretion and integration with emerging technologies. Units began retracting armored vehicles from exposed positions, adopting tactics that avoided immediate enemy attention and reduced the risk of catastrophic losses. The initial doctrine that championed aggressive, head-on armored thrusts gave way to a more nuanced approach emphasizing stealth, patience, and deliberate maneuvers. Emphasis shifted to camouflage, concealed positioning, and selective engagement rather than continuous, unrelenting advances that made vehicles easy targets. Rabatino's lesson was clear and resonant. The long-standing armored warfare doctrine, which once prioritized direct confrontation and overwhelming force, had to evolve, not by abandoning tanks altogether, but by employing them in unpredictable, unconventional ways that exploited their strengths while minimizing vulnerabilities. Ukrainian commanders quickly realized that the mono-on Abrams no longer needed to serve as the spearhead leading charges. Instead, they advanced cautiously and deliberately, using the tanks to provoke enemy responses rather than attempting to break enemy lines outright. Abrams tanks operating in open terrain inevitably attracted attention from UAV surveillance, precision-guided missiles, and artillery fire, becoming highly visible and valuable targets that Russian forces had to address promptly. Meanwhile, infantry and BMPs skillfully exploited this forced distraction, repositioning themselves and inching closer to objectives that were previously too dangerous to approach. This emerging pattern fundamentally transformed battlefield management and tactical thinking. Tanks were repurposed as tactical bait through controlled exposure, drawing enemy fire and revealing hidden positions. Despite some Abrams sustaining damage, their robust design and advanced armor systems protected crews effectively, enabling survival and allowing them to continue fighting rather than being permanently sidelined. Enemy firing positions, once concealed, revealed themselves through the very act of attacking the exposed tanks, enabling precise Ukrainian counterstrikes using artillery, drones, or other indirect fire methods. The Abrams themselves didn't destroy these positions directly, but remained visible long enough to force enemy exposure, representing a reversal of traditional tank roles that had focused on delivering decisive, overwhelming blows. Crews adapted by making short, calculated moves and executing pre-planned withdrawals, prioritizing patience, coordination, and tactical timing over raw aggression. Tanks controlled the tempo of engagements rather than attempting to break through enemy lines in a single thrust, reducing the likelihood of sudden, devastating enemy strikes on accompanying infantry by drawing enemy fire away from more vulnerable forces. Though costly in terms of ammunition expenditure and exposure risk, this tactic reflected a highly adaptive strategy finely tuned to modern warfare's evolving demands, where information, precision, and maneuverability often trump brute force and massed assaults. This shift underscored the necessity of integrating combined arms tactics and highlighted the growing importance of electronic warfare, reconnaissance, and drone operations in shaping the battlefield. Ukrainian forces increasingly coordinated Abrams deployments with real-time intelligence feeds, drone surveillance, and indirect fire support, ensuring that each tank movement was part of a broader, integrated plan rather than isolated actions. Commanders placed significant emphasis on communication and reconnaissance, leveraging technological advantages to mitigate vulnerabilities inherent in armored operations. This approach not only enhanced survivability but also maximized the strategic impact of limited armored assets in contested environments, turning the once straightforward role of tanks into a sophisticated tool of battlefield deception and force multipliers. The calculation of risk versus reward in armored warfare evolved significantly over the decades, reflecting a profound and nuanced shift in battlefield dynamics that transformed the very nature of armored engagements. Early tank doctrine, which often emphasized shock and breakthrough, gave way to a more sophisticated and measured approach, where exposure was no longer simply a risk to be avoided, but a tactical variable to be managed. When exposure became inevitable, due to the nature of the terrain or mission objectives, the critical choice for commanders and tank crews shifted to deciding precisely what to reveal and at what moment, turning visibility into a tool of tactical control, rather than a mere vulnerability. The Abrams tank, renowned for its heavy composite armor and powerful armament, embodied this evolved doctrine by absorbing enemy fire deliberately and effectively, holding the line long enough to create vital opportunities for friendly infantry and lighter, more mobile units to maneuver and exploit gaps in enemy defenses. This operational pattern became routine. The Abrams would advance deliberately and methodically, drawing enemy attention and fire, thereby creating a psychological and physical buffer zone that allowed Allied forces to move forward with reduced risk. The cycle of advance, distraction, and maneuver replaced the earlier doctrine of dramatic high-risk charges, with a more attritional and calculated method that prioritized sustained pressure and battlefield control over rapid breakthroughs. In this way, the Abrams transitioned from being a spearhead designed to break enemy lines through sheer force into a protective shield that enabled coordinated movement and localized control, essentially acting as a mobile fortress on the battlefield. Whether this approach is considered wasteful or necessary depends largely on one's understanding of modern battlefields, where being spotted often equates to facing imminent and intense enemy attack. In this context, deliberately drawing enemy fire can be far more advantageous than avoiding detection altogether, as it forces opponents to react on terms set by friendly forces, disrupting their plans and tempo. This strategic shift reshaped the role of armor significantly, positioning the Abrams and similar main battle tanks in roles that few military planners had envisioned in earlier eras. Meanwhile, European counterparts like the Leopard 2 adopted complementary tactics characterized by patience and stealth. Crews would conceal their tanks in damaged urban structures or fortified positions to reduce the likelihood of detection, striking swiftly and decisively before withdrawing to minimize exposure and risk. This approach limited enemy counterfire and resulted in battlefields marked by confusion and fragmented engagements rather than clear, continuous front lines. The British Challenger 2 operated from even greater distances, leveraging its precise rifled gun to disrupt enemy logistics and command nodes while maintaining concealment and ready withdrawal routes. This doctrine transformed the tank into a heavy sniper platform where timing, patience, and precision were valued far more than speed or flamboyant maneuvers. Collectively, the Abrams and European tanks embody the modern armored combat rule. Avoid direct confrontation when possible, instead influencing the battle through superior firepower, advantageous positioning, and psychological pressure rather than through holding ground under sustained enemy fire. This evolution highlights a renewed emphasis on survivability, controlled aggression, and adaptability in the increasingly complex and often urbanized battlefields of today, environments where the old paradigms of tank warfare, characterized by mass charges and linear fronts, no longer apply, and where success depends on mastering new principles of combined arms integration and situational awareness. The presence of UAVs made lingering in an area dangerous, as even a successful strike could turn into a loss if the tank remained visible for too long. Appearing briefly and vanishing quickly prevented the enemy from focusing their attention. These tanks denied the adversary the opportunity to establish a coherent response, fundamentally altering how supporting units operated. Infantry and drones could capitalize on the disruption caused by sudden, precise strikes. Enemy formations slowed, routes were reconsidered, and movements became cautious and tentative. Importantly, the tank did not need to advance aggressively to create this effect. Simply breaking the enemy's certainty was enough. Tank crews adapted their mentality, shifting from aggressive tactics to a more restrained approach where success was measured by disruption rather than destruction. Over time, this method became standard practice rather than an exception. Crews of Leopard 2 and Challenger 2 tanks planned their engagements around strict time limits, escape routes, and maintaining silence, always beginning with the critical question: how quickly would their presence attract attention? This redefined the concept of speed, not just how fast a tank could maneuver across terrain, but how swiftly it could strike and then disappear. The engagement near Kiev illustrated how modern armored warfare can unfold without any attempt at a traditional breakthrough. Instead of seizing ground by force, the goal was to disrupt the enemy's timing. Ukrainian planners prepared the battlefield days in advance, selecting abandoned buildings along a key route frequently used by Russian vehicles for unit rotations and supply movements. Under cover of darkness, a Leopard 2 was stealthily positioned inside one of these buildings, its silhouette obscured by walls and debris blending into the war-torn environment. From this concealed vantage point, the crew did not aggressively seek targets. Their role was to wait and observe while drones and forward observers tracked enemy movement along the road. When a Russian column entered the area, following a predictable pattern with command vehicles and support elements clustered closely to maintain control, the Leopard remained hidden at the forest's edge, allowing the entire column to commit before any contact was made. This patience was critical because an early attack would have caused the column to halt and scatter, avoiding sustained pressure. Once the lead vehicles passed key reference points, the tank advanced just enough to secure a clear firing angle, targeting command vehicles and support platforms first rather than the heaviest armor, since disrupting coordination was more valuable than destroying mass. Within seconds, the column's rhythm collapsed as vehicles stopped, reversed, or repositioned without clear orders. The Leopard crew did not linger to witness the chaos, trusting that drones were already adjusting their surveillance. After firing the final round, the tank withdrew along a pre-planned route that avoided open spaces and minimized the risk of being tracked. Artillery counterfire followed soon after but struck positions that were already abandoned. The damage was done before the enemy could react effectively. Without clear leadership and with support vehicles disabled, the remaining Russian forces hesitated. Their movement slowed, units spread out, and focus shifted from advancing to securing their positions. This pause created the real opportunity for Ukrainian infantry units, which had been waiting nearby, to advance, using the confusion to cross exposed terrain that would normally be too dangerous. Drones shifted their focus from the tank to the immobilized column, guiding infantry around damaged vehicles and toward higher ground overlooking the route. The Leopard did not reappear because its role in this phase was complete and the fight proceeded without it. From an outside perspective, this action seemed subtle and lacked dramatic, sweeping advances or visible collapses, but its impact was significant and strategically effective. The key change observed was in operational tempo. A once steady route became uncertain and risky, forcing Russian units to slow down and revise plans. This disruption extended beyond the immediate clash, as caution replaced routine on nearby roads, altering broader operations. The attack relied on precise coordination rather than brute force. The tank acted as a quick trigger, striking swiftly and vanishing, allowing others to exploit the moment. The Leopard tank never aimed to hold ground or push aggressively. By disrupting enemy rhythm, it influenced decision-making and marked a shift in armored warfare, especially under constant surveillance. Tanks no longer serve as steel spears to break lines but draw fire, set traps, and create narrow windows for infantry. Abrams tanks attract attention for safe advances. Leopard 2s strike quickly and disappear. Challenger 2s deliver precise shots and withdraw before threats escalate. This shift prioritizes survival and timing over speed and mass, raising questions beyond Ukraine. Is this adaptation temporary or the future of ground combat? Will drones push tank design towards stealth over speed? Will armies focus more on deception and disruption than brute force? If this insight clarifies modern armored warfare, please support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to Battle Report, and share your thoughts in the comments.